Today we're joined by Jay Wallace, VP of Global GTM at VulnCheck. Jay, how are you?
I'm doing great, Jake. Thanks for having me on.
Yeah, no problem. Thank you for joining us. So, could you give us a little bit of information about your background and also an introduction to VulnCheck, please?
Sure, yeah. Winding path to get into global go-to-market. That's for sure. I started out my career in retail grocery. Did that for a few years, about six to be exact. Moved my way into finance, so I did everything from trust and estates to financial advisory work. And at some point, pivoted over to SaaS sales. That was probably 12 or 13 years ago now. I've been in cyber for the majority of my time in SaaS, and over the last 2.5 years, I've been building VulnCheck from a go-to-market standpoint. We are not necessarily a SaaS platform. We sell a SaaS product, but we are a data intelligence company. So what we primarily do, VulnCheck, is we do exploit intelligence. So think about what's live on the internet right now, what threats are on the internet right now. And this tends to traverse both traditional cyber, but also into other areas of cyber, which I think when we started out, we weren't really thinking too much about. But cyber insurance is one area that's growing quite quickly for us. And we're seeing more and more carriers that are looking to mitigate risk. And obviously, that's the business that they're in. They're looking to mitigate risk with better data. We provide data. And so I think the summary of VulnCheck really boils down to we tell you what's bad on the internet. We tell you as quick as possible. We tell you as often as possible. And we do it in a machine consumable way, meaning you shouldn't have an analyst go through and reading all of the reports. There's too many reports. There's too many vulnerabilities. So we deliver directly into the machines that the analyst would be using.
Great, thank you. Yeah, and so I mean, cyber's uniquely positioned at the minute, and there's a real emphasis on real-time data within cyber because it can be pragmatic and proactive. You can respond to it, but with a lot more data comes kind of a lot more manual work to consume it. So as you say, machine readable, possible to kind of interact with and integrate into your business without massively increasing the manual tasks involved. So thanks for the info on your background. It's, I mean, very varied, and there's an interesting intersection from what you mentioned between cybersecurity, fintech, cloud infrastructure as well, and all of those seem to be key components of evaluating cyber risk profiles. So, could you tell me a little bit about the insights you've acquired throughout your career in those various different pockets of experience that are particularly pertinent and transferable to cyber lines?
Yeah, for sure. So I wasn't in cyber at the bank, but I definitely dealt with cyber issues at the bank. And so I've both seen cyber from a consumer side and throughout my career, of course, as a consumer side. But when I was in financial services, just the mitigating controls we had in place to do literally anything and everything. When I was in banking, my first large firm that I worked for as a financial advisor, you could only use the BlackBerry if it was data only. Couldn't have a phone line. Not allowed. Funny enough, at the full circle moment, the place that I'm taking this call from is the first place that I worked in Austin as a financial advisor. So we couldn't use phones for anything. This is all just total control to make sure that there was less cyber risk, especially when dealing with customer data. Like customer data at this point could be anything from, how you're logging into a system. It could also be, somebody emails you and says trade 15 shares of JP Morgan Chase. It could be literally anything. And so as a consumer, I saw the need for cyber early on. And then an operator in cyber today, I see that risks have just increased, and what we're seeing, I would say more so than ever. And this is what many of our carriers are looking for that we work with is, tell me what sort of risk happens at the time of underwrite. Tell me what type of risk happens along the cycle, if it's a 1 year, a 3 year, 10-year agreement, whatever it could be. Tell me what risks are associated with a particular customer along the way. It gets more complicated as you go into global business because you start to see things that, if you were just a local mom and pop shop here in Austin, Texas, you only have to mitigate risk for a specific geo region. However, if you're ExxonMobil, for example, you have to mitigate risk globally, and all those risks look a little bit differently. And so that makes it quite complicated to try and handle and understand the risk. And then there's what a lot of people don't want to talk about, and that's when you file an insurance claim. And it's time to figure out, can you recreate the incident that happened? Many of our carriers have entire teams built on top of recreate the type of incident that may have happened that created the claim. And their job is to try and figure out, was this claim legitimate? Not necessarily just to decline the claim, for example, but they need to be able to have their P's and Q's all in order, so that they can then say, yes, we're paying a multi-million-dollar claim based on ransomware that happened, 9 or 10 months ago, however long it takes to do forensics and figure out who was responsible for it and how often it happened and where all did it happen. Sometimes these things, when you really get into large institutions like Equifax or whatever, these things take years to unwind. And so there's a lot of data needed both for forensic recreation, but also just mitigating risk along the way. In the business that we're in, unfortunately, you see things like React to Shell, which was the big vulnerability in December. It's basically the internet is on fire. You go back a few years, it was React to Shell, or it was I'm sorry, Log4j. And so there's been many of these incidents that insurance carriers are extremely concerned with because it impacts such a large swath of the internet. And like it or not, software it's the world, right? Like we are in this world where everybody's building a SaaS product. SaaS sprawl is a problem. People will just sign up for any kind of SaaS B2C consumer product, and in the age of AI, that's only multiplied by a ton. So we're seeing, in other words, to sum this whole thing up, what risk are we seeing with insurers and carriers? Everything. Everybody's worried about everything all the time, and I think it's really important that you have some controls in place. A single source is not really going to do the job anymore. You need multiple sources. We see ourselves at VulnCheck as an aggregator of all of those different sources as an input to the additional sources that carriers are using today to mitigate risk.
Yeah, so and I think you kind of covered it really well there. The entry points for vulnerabilities are they're just compounding, particularly with some of the key technologies that are growing at the minute. Obviously, everything's built on the internet. AI is growing, and then when you add in other variables, they kind of exponentially compound the potential risk. And the challenge is really finding signal in the noise because every data point has potential use. So how do you understand one which is kind of useful for a given situation? And two, how do you leverage that without it being this kind of overbearing manual task that is just kind of impossible to complete? So yeah, no, interesting perspective. Thank you. And when it comes to real-time data insights, there's a clear opportunity for carriers to use those insights to improve their loss ratio through more informed risk selection and ultimately binding safer, more profitable risks. Cyber's got the unique advantage of being able to mitigate losses after a policy is bound. Could you tell me a little bit about how carriers should be thinking about improving margins through post-binding intervention?
Yeah, I can definitely do that. I think I would say shameless plug for VulnCheck, not necessarily just for VulnCheck. I think you need to find real actionable real-time data, as real-time as you can get it. Even we claim that we're near real time, but we don't say real time. So it's impossible to know exactly what's on the internet at this very moment in time. But when we think about looking for risky assets on the internet, for example, VulnCheck provides a data source that's a 3-day backup, a 10-day backup, a 30-day backup, and a 90-day backup. So you can see what the internet landscape has looked like over time. You need to find sources like that. And the reason you do that is so that, one, you can automate risk assessment at the time of applying for a cyber policy. Obviously, when you apply for a cyber policy, you're going to need to send in a lot of information, an IP range, some asset inventory data, what kind of controls do you have in place, example, for identity access management? Do you have privileged access controls in place? Do you have your SOC 2 compliance? All of these types of things that you need to have in place. And so that comes sort of like post application. And so generally speaking, when you're applying for a product, the name of the game is like get to the quote as fast as possible. However, many insurance carriers don't have an automated way to do that. I mean, they'll have some general risk sense, but the thing you don't want to do is quote something that's 50% less on the initial quote. And then when it gets to the actual risk assessment, you double the cost of the quote because you're going to lose that deal anyway. So I'm just talking profitability here. How do you get insureds in the door? You need real-time data. The second thing that you need is you need to be able to have some sort of an ongoing control. And that could be, government sources, depending on where you are in the world. There are things like ANISA in Europe. There are things like the JVN in Japan. There are things like NIST, NVD, and SysACAV here in the States. And SysACAV is used quite often. It's a free open source platform. We provide a SysACAV alternative that's completely free also. VulnCheck has a community edition that we provide for free with full API access, an extremely reliable API, full offline backup if you want to take it and use it somewhere locally. We have many insureds that are actually using just our community data as an input for their overall controls. And the reason I say you need this ongoing mitigation is because when the next brush fire comes up, you don't want to get caught on a claim that you didn't know about or warn your insureds about. One thing that I've seen a lot of carriers moving into is proactive notification of major incidents online, especially if they know that in the original asset inventory that was provided to them, especially when they see that those things are like large scale internet issues, or even if they're not large scale. Let's say that you're a carrier and you have a lot of financial services organizations. If you see a ransomware campaign being carried out by a threat actor that is always targeting financial services institutions, many of our insureds, our carriers are now pushing notifications out to their customers saying, hey, we've noticed this thing on the internet. You should be hyper aware of it. Based on the data that we had when you originally applied for your quote, we believe that you have exposure to this particular threat. You should run mitigating controls. This does two things. One, it keeps our insureds safe. I think that's first and foremost. You asked about profitability and how do you keep margins in place. Well, this is one of the ways that you do it. You get proactive about notifying your customers that there are risks out there that you're aware of, that they should be aware of, and if they do nothing about them, or in a lot of cases, it's not the insured themselves, it's their supply chain vendors, but it all introduces risk. And so we've seen a trend with many of the carriers being proactive, running a program where they're saying, hey, we've noticed this large scale internet thing and you should be aware of it too. So that 6 months down the line, when they get a claim that's filed saying, hey, this ransomware, this threat actor created some ransomware campaign and they got us and we had to pay out a ransomware claim, then they can say, well, we warned you about this and we told you that this was a major issue. Here's the evidence. Here are the receipts that we did try to get in contact with you and let you know that this is a major risk. And for those reasons, we can't pay the claim. And so I think that this is really important because it requires both the insured and the carrier to be on the same page about risk. And the only way you can really do that is by having some real-time data or some pulse as to what's happening on the internet right now. I think that's the most important thing, whether it's VulnCheck or some other source. You just need a constant source of data telling you what are the bad things happening on the internet? How can they impact my insured?
Yeah, it makes total sense. And there's a really interesting perspective there in that I've previously had discussions about you can mitigate the likelihood of a claim having to be made by proactively approaching vulnerabilities. Based on what you've just mentioned, you can also surface ineligible claims that are ineligible for payout based on the insured understanding that there's a vulnerability, but kind of not acting on it.
Yeah, I think that's the trend that we're seeing both in cyber insurance, but we're also seeing this across the enterprise when it comes to monitoring your own supply chain vendors. We've seen a lot of large enterprises. It all sort of feeds into the idea of risk, right? It's all everybody's looking for the same thing. What could potentially get me? I think most CISOs would agree. It's not if you get breached, it's when you get breached. How bad? How big is the blast radius? And one of the low hanging fruits that we're seeing across the enterprises is supply chain vendors. And so when I talk to folks at potential partners or customers or prospects, when I talk to them at conferences, most of the things that they care about are bucketed in two things. One is network edge devices. What is internet facing that could hurt me? The second is their supply chain vendors. It's been the same common theme for years now. And so in the supply chain, there are a lot of leak buckets, and carriers know that. And when you are a major global brand, that may be impacting your premiums because at the end of the day, if you have a ton of supply chain vendors and you look at those supply chain vendors, they look very different from the US to the UK to Europe Africa, Australia, and across Asia, they all look very different. And so the threat landscape looks quite different. The risk continuum is very, very different across different markets. And as a result, yeah, we're seeing this over and over again, both with the insurance carriers and those that they insure, are all quite concerned with these two things. Again, like it boils down to, at least from thematically from what I see over and over again, it's network edge devices and it's supply chain vendors.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's fair to say, I think cyber is probably one of the most dynamic and prone to evolution lines that an insurer could consider nowadays. And I guess the technological landscape that we live in, it continues to evolve at a meteoric pace, which it drives equally fast advancements in cyber threats and in turn cyber security. New technologies beget new vulnerabilities, which beget new threat detection and incident response solutions. So there's a natural imperative for cyber coverage to keep up. What would you say the fundamental pillars insurers should consider in order to keep pace with that technological advancement?
Don't tuck your head in the sand right now. Not a good time to do so. AI is here whether we like it or not. I will totally admit I was a slow adopter to AI. When I say slow adopter, I mean, I still talk to some people that don't use ChatGPT, and it drives me a little bit crazy because I'm like, you're a business leader and you don't embrace things like ChatGPT or Claude or any other AI, you're getting left behind. And I think insureds need to think the same way. I will say one additional thing that's been complicating a lot of the way that insureds behave really boils down to this. There's a lot of AI slop on the internet that includes exploit POCs, that includes false indicators of compromise, that includes false potential indicators of compromise, false actions being taken on the internet that are recorded somewhere, and it's just junk. And so this is just another challenge that a lot of carriers are going to have to deal with, unfortunately, but it's here to stay. And so the way to embrace that, I think, is to look into things like real-time data, make sure that you have good data models that can produce risk, make sure you have good alerting that can produce risk, not to create more alerts. I think the alert fatigue thing has been around for 10, 20 years. It's not going away anytime soon. So unfortunately, there's not much you can do about that. But yeah, you do have to invest in AI at this point. And I think that doesn't mean you have to build your own LLM. That means that there's probably a lot of third-party software out there that will help you mitigate risk or understand your risk better. Um, but I don't know how you deal with the loads of data and the volume of data that you have to comb through as an insurance carrier if you're not using some sort of automation. I think the other thing is, some of the old school tactics are still true. Go to conferences, talk with your peers, meet with people that are in the industry, because oftentimes you can just pick up these little one or two things that will help you stay on top of things. I know for myself, building businesses from the ground up over the last few years, I would say I've learned a lot of little tricks here and there just by talking to other people that have dealt with something similar to me and have been able to introduce me to new tools, new resources. Many times they're free, they're completely free, and they don't cost anything but your time. And I would say your time is valuable if it's spent using something that can help you learn or grow or get better at your craft, then you should do it. Specifically when it comes to carriers, I think that not much is new in terms of the process is still the process. You evaluate risk and you determine how much somebody should pay you to take on that risk. That's not necessarily true, but the risk is new. It's the same old exploits, it's the same old vulnerabilities, it's the same on, access controls or privileged access or any of these different vectors that could cause you issues in cyber. It's just that they've changed and they've gotten faster, they've gotten more complex, they've gotten, I would say, even more polarizing these days because you don't know what's right and what's wrong. And so a lot of folks that I talk to have the tendency to say, just forget it. I'm gonna throw in the towel and I'm not gonna look at this again for another year. I would just implore everyone that you cannot wait another year. In another year, it's gonna look totally different than it does today, and by that time, you'll be way too far behind. And in the case of cyber, we're seeing more and more folks sign up as CNAs, which we are also a CNA. When you're a research CNA, you can find anything on the internet, say that's bad, and you can get it assigned to CVE. And I would say, again, with the introduction of AI models and things like that, this is getting introduced at a new clip that we haven't seen before. And this is even not taking into account that you use an example of a company like Linux. Linux became a CNA last year, and in their first month, they dropped 500 new vulnerabilities. You multiply that across the entire threat landscape, and basically, if you're an analyst today in cybersecurity, you're drowning in these types of things. And so, where I'm going with this is that I just think it's really important that you embrace the I can't remember the movie now, but it says embrace the suck. You know, I think you have to embrace it. You know, we've all signed up for, I would say, a rough go at it because it's a difficult business that we're in, but you have to embrace it. And again, talk with your peers, talk with your colleagues, stay on top of new technology because it's the only thing that's going to help you stay afloat.
I mean, you mentioned kind of what you've just discussed really highlights I guess, how monumental the task is ahead of us, and the only way to tackle it is proactively, head first. It's going to be there whether you approach a solution or not. So better to do that sooner rather than later. And I guess on the time aspect as well, the longer you wait, the greater the consequences of and even likelihood of any cyber breaches become. But not only that, on the time aspect. So with the pace of technological advancement, it's compounded by an exponential advantage for carriers who can be nimble and adapt with speed. So how should carriers approach this when it comes to implementation and implementing the organizational change that meaningful change really kind of demands?
Yeah, there's two things that I would say here. This is what hasn't changed. Leadership has not changed, and implementing change is hard, especially at large organizations. So I think this is really, really important. And I'll just call it a spade here. The insurance industry does not have a reputation for being first to market with new technology. I think that needs to change. We see this so often with financial services organizations that we work with, that they are hesitant to make a change because it's hard. And I think in this case, if you're a large insurer and you're worried about risk, you have to be willing to change. So this is a leadership top down type of initiative that's going to happen. Many of the leaders are going to have to inspire their leaders to change. And it's not that hard. Ironically, I would say one thing that I've been doing lately is asking AI for help on planning things like rolling out big, large scale changes because it does show you your risk continuum. You'll have to tune down the great idea, great job, wonderful. Here's what you should do next. I'll have to tune that out if that gets on your nerves, because all of the AI models have a tendency to make you try and feel good about your questions. But I would say that for me, thinking about things a little bit more tactically, I have found a lot of utility in asking AI for these. So I would say it's twofold. You have to be willing to have the discussion about making a large change in the organization. And then two, I would say with the help of things like ChatGPT and Claude, you can actually compile a structured plan in a really short period of time. So I say these two things because I think leadership has to be willing to have the conversation. But it doesn't have to be a 6 or 8 or 12 month process to start the plan. Really just boils down to you putting in the work, understanding exactly how you want to roll out the new adoption of large language models, ingesting more data, mitigating more risk. You have to be willing to take the first step. But then in terms of like structuring a plan, what used to take us 9 months to do could probably be accomplished in 6 weeks these days.
Yeah, and that's a really interesting point, right? In that AI it's not only the tool that we're kind of looking to implement in order to solve a variety of issues, but it's also something that can streamline the implementation of itself. And that's a really interesting aspect, I think. And another thing you mentioned that truly resonated was the idea of AI being a yes man. I totally agree there. It can get on your nerves when you're trying to plan and get an objective partner with a chat GPT or a Claude or a Gemini, and it keeps complimenting you. Thank you, but I need a bit more support than that. So how can insurers then identify opportunities to use existing tools in their arsenals in new ways to keep their cyber books as profitable as possible?
Click the little star button and see what AI has been shoved in your face. I mean, every tool we log into these days is saying, "Hey, try our new AI model. Actually try them." I think that's the easiest part is just actually try them. Some of them are really good, some of them are not so good. We use a call reporting software called Gong here, and it's been, I would say, it's great at translation. It's great at getting a transcript. It's great at doing a bunch of things like that. But over the last 12 months, we've seen them really step up and lean into the AI modeling, and their investment in AI is very obvious at this point because now we have agents running all the time, finding interesting things for us, whether it's competitive information, whether it's a particular new product that we're rolling out that's not being talked about the right way. I mean, it helps our product teams, it helps our sales teams, it helps our executive team, it helps everyone. And probably wouldn't have if we wouldn't have just clicked the button and said, tell me more about this new feature. It does get a little overwhelming. I will admit that every time you log into a new system, when they roll out a new agent or a new AI model, it's all in your face. But I think you have to ask yourself the questions. Do you have unlimited budget for new analysts? The answer is always no. Do you have unlimited time for those analysts to onboard and ramp? The answer is always no. And so what do we usually want? We hire somebody, we want them to be fully productive in about half the time that it will really take them to be productive. And so the only way you can mitigate that is by using things like AI and large language models, using technology for automation. It doesn't just need to be some new fancy agent that's rolled out or some new startup that just got 100 million in funding. It just needs to be something that can help you do your work faster. So as long as you keep your expectations at the level that they should be at, then I would say that's how I would highly recommend adopting new tools. Is just give them a shot. We all have a chance to say, yes, no. Now I would say definitely check with your cyber team before you go accepting every AI model that pops up on the internet. But chances are, if it's already in place at the company, if it's already something that's helping you understand and analyze risk at a higher clip, and they come out with something that is agentic, it's likely going to be helpful. Now, how it's helpful is totally up to you. Everybody runs a different business model, but that's where I would start.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's interesting and quite comforting in a way what you're recommending. So the conversation around AI kind of focuses quite heavily on a fear of replacement of humans by AI. But the one of the themes in what you're saying is changing human behavior, and the human aspect of how AI is used is going to be what really drives value. So just an interesting almost dichotomy there, but also a kind of symbiotic complementary relationship with AI.
Yeah, I,
In a
I
in a
don't think
similar
that we should be scared of robots taking our jobs in most cases. I think that, automated teller machines, ATMs, have been around, I will point out, since the late 80s. They have not stolen tellers' jobs yet. Now, have the need for tellers at banks gone down? Yes, because people like myself don't want to go in them. We just want to do everything online and do it off my app and that type of thing. I think for the audience that we're talking to today, we shouldn't be concerned about AI taking our jobs. Where I would say we should be most concerned is if we're not adopting AI and not adopting new technology, then we're going to fall behind, and that's going to put us out of a job, not the other way around.
Yeah, it's not the AI itself that's maybe a threat. It's someone that's going to use AI to be kind of perhaps more efficient and more effective than you if you fail to adapt. And I think that scales as well, right? It's not just on an individual person's role level. It's on an organization to organization level as well. In a similar vein, then, how can insurers identify new data points and processes with the potential to improve their underwriting margins? As you've mentioned, there's new data available all the time. Much of it is real time. What's the best way to dig into that data and really understand what's of value and is going to make meaningful change?
Yeah, there's a few things that I would recommend here. One is just make sure that it's the data source is system dependent, meaning, for example, when you start going into broader markets, and this, for example, in Europe, they don't use a CVID. Well, they will tie it to a CVID in many cases, but they may be pulling a source that doesn't have a CVEID. If you can't ingest the data because there's no CVEID on a vulnerability, that's going to cause problem like Havoc. That's just additional manual work that you're going to have to do. Japan, for example, they have the JVN ID, and so you need some control to be able to like port that into a CVEID. So again, I guess going back to this, I would say spike on automation, make sure that it's in a format that you can ingest. Make sure that it's a reliable source. One of the reasons that so many people flock to our community offering is because the JSON schema is very clean, it's very neat, it's ingested into basically any system without a lot of overhead. So your total cost of ownership is very low. Um, but also that the API is quite reliable. What we've seen over the last, at least in the States, what we've seen over the last 24 months or so is that the NIST National Vulnerability Database, the API breaks all the time, or the website goes down a bunch. And so, in a critical moment where you're trying to assess risk because the new celebrity vulnerability is all over the internet, it's on BBC, it's made the Wall Street Journal, you want answers really, really fast. And if your sources are broken, that's a problem. And so we provide a very reliable API so that people can call on this thing anytime and all times. We're not the only source though. There's a ton of public sources out there. For example, the old Alien Vault, and I'm forgetting the name of it now, but they maintain a database that shows threat actor activity that's still updated, and it's free. You know, you can go onto that anytime. If you're using other tools like open source tools like OpenCTI, for example, OpenCTI is a really good example of something that you can plug in a bunch of different data sources and you can start to sort of construct your own risk modeling. So I think that that one's quite interesting. In my humble opinion here, I think that you sort of have to have all the data, and then you need to have a model that will like parse that data based on the risk that you're looking for. Our customers, in addition to buying VulnCheck data, they're always hunting for new data. So not only do we get a bunch of inputs from our customers saying, "Hey, there's this new AI vulnerability database. You know, what do you guys know about AI models? What do you know about prompt injections? You know, what can you tell me about this new thing that just came out?" And in a lot of cases, it's like we can't tell you anything. We have no idea. It's the first we're hearing of it. We'll go investigate. But I think our customers are challenging us to go find new sets of data everywhere. I would highly encourage all of the carriers to have that same mentality. Just hunt for new sources of data. If you have a good place to put it, like an OpenCTI, or if you're more advanced, you're running a data lake, Databricks, Snowflake, something like that, then all those models want is inputs. So just go hunt for the newest data, the freshest data that you can find. There's just endless open source data sets that you can go collect from. And then, yeah, if you want to do it on your own, there's a lot of really interesting things you can do. Like I said, inside of a data lake or some kind of an automation platform. If you don't want to do it on your own, call us. We'll help. This is sort of our bag and what we do. We aggregate data and help you find really interesting things. But I think that no matter what, the mentality just needs to be go find all the data, do something interesting with it. If you keep that as your North Star, you're going to be just fine.
Totally. And yeah, again, building a culture of curiosity then I think is kind of a big piece there, like going out and proactively kind of seeking these new opportunities for better data, for more kind of reliable real-time data. It really requires that curiosity. And so that I think speaks to a little bit about how you foster cultural change with existing teams, but also what hiring processes should look like. Which kind of people do you want in your organization? And then the other interesting thing I think you touched on was the value of a bi-directional relationship between data providers and carriers, or any organization that consumes their data. Like if the input can go in the other direction as well, you as data providers can improve kind of your knowledge of the industry and the data that's available, how it's applied, and then can kind of propagate those learnings into your customers and into organizations that rely on you.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. Getting to a place of genuine curiosity is not hard within your own bubble. Expanding the horizon to try and get more inputs from more places that oftentimes will have an objective view of the problem. That's a little bit more problematic, and I think that's where I said earlier. I mentioned leadership. That's where leadership comes in. You can put everything you want to into a chatbot and tell it, "Hey, help me with this problem." It'll tell you, but then you have to do it. If you're not writing an application, that means the human's on the hook. And so I think that's just a mentality that we all sort of need to grab onto if we're going to be in this business anyway, because things are so dynamic and they change so often that we don't really have another choice other than to adapt or die. And I'm not interested in dying, so I'm going to continue to adapt and continue to try to look at new things and new sources, new inputs, things like that that help me make better decisions every day. And this is the advice that I give our carriers and our insureds when we're talking to them about risk.
Yeah, I mean, adapt or die it's absolutely the paradigm at the minute. And it's an urgent one as well. Like it's adapt or die right now. That decision kind of needs to be made and started to be worked towards. I guess looking forward, then we've discussed that AI is kind of the obvious primary source for novel cyber vulnerabilities and security solutions right now. But what other key changes do you see coming in both the short and long term future? Can you speak to upcoming technologies, data sources, dynamics within the cyber world that are likely to shift the ground underneath Cyberline's providers?
Yeah, I would say one thing that we've seen as a pretty heavy change is, and it's not just us, this is independent research has sort of validated that we're seeing less and less critical vulnerabilities show up, but the ones that are showing up are much more weaponized, much more potent, and they tend to have an impact much faster. So what we pay a lot of attention to in our cyber landscape and what we think is interesting are remote code executable vulnerabilities that, you could pop a shell from your basement, not being a nation state actor, but just somebody bored on the internet on a Saturday night. Those sort of novel end day vulnerabilities are the ones that we see being the most dynamic and the most potent out in the market. And so I would say what we have seen is a big shift from paying $1 million for an original O day that you find on the dark web to, hey, there's this old vulnerability. It's 6 months old, a year old, 2 years old, never been exploited in the wild. Why not? This is so easy. Those are the things that we're seeing sort of pop up, and it's very irrespective of risk score. So many of the inputs that we see industry using are things like CVSS and EPSS and input scoring. I'm not totally discrediting those. Not, and the keyword operative word here is totally, not totally discrediting those. I would just say that those are an input and that's it. We just recently released our first ever VulnCheck exploit intelligence report, the VIR report. And that's available on vulncheck.com. It's a pretty long form report, but it does show state vulnerabilities from our own research and our own team from the data that we collect. What we found was that there, again, are a lot less vulnerabilities being exploited out in the wild by sheer numbers. Um, but it's not the O days. It's the old normal patch mitigation because people are using common inputs like CVSS as their North Star, saying, well, if it's below a 7, why patch? That can be a P3, but that's not true when it's part of an exploit chain. And we're seeing 6s, 5s, 3s get exploited out in the wild all the time. And so I think big shift is going to have to be away from a single scoring methodology to where you have some sort of a watermark and you say patch above this, don't patch below this. And you're going to have to start looking at things like what is actually being exploited in the wild. This goes back to my very first comment about what's live on the internet right now. That's what you should be paying attention to. And it's going to be a big shift because a lot of people see this as some ocean that they have to swim through in order to get to what it could be deemed critical. um, we're in the business of decreasing criticals, not increasing them. And I think this is a big shift that the industry is going to have to go to. You have to start thinking like a threat actor. Start thinking about where's the lowest hanging fruit for a threat actor to cause risk to your customers. And if you're not thinking like they are, and I would even argue from like an offensive standpoint, if I were a bad actor, how would I get into the network? How would I breach one of my customers? And so we're seeing a big trend in things like, breach attack simulation based on assets that are provided to insureds. We're seeing the carriers start to think about, well, if I was the bad guy, how would I brief my top 10 customers? And once you start thinking about it from that perspective, which again is a big paradigm shift, but I think it's needed, you'll start to really see where your risk is and you'll start to be able to mitigate that risk. And in many cases, you become a better partner to your customers also. It's not just you trying to tell them we're not paying a claim. It's like, no, you're actually helping them, being an asset and a partner to your customers. And we've seen customers that are getting these notifications proactively saying, thank you very much, renewing their contracts. This is like better long-term value for your customer base as a carrier if you're doing these sort of proactive activities.
Yeah, it's a bittersweet time to be in cybersecurity, I think, and in cyber coverage. Like there's a minefield of challenges, but every challenge can be an opportunity. So how do you turn the challenge into an opportunity? And I think those that do are really going to pull ahead. They're going to see competitive competitive differentiation. They're going to see business growth. And those organizations that do that are also the ones that are likely to adopt new technologies to make themselves internally more efficient. So those two things will really come together to kind of create leaders of the pack, I think. So, Jay, I've got one more question for you, and the answer to this can be around anything, but what would you change about the insurance industry and why?
Stop being so insurance industry. I don't know. I say that sort of tongue in cheek, but I think it's um, be willing to adopt not only new technologies, but really be a new mindset. Um, think about your customers. Really try to shake off the you just want to deny my claim or you greedy insurance company stigma. The previous question I just mentioned in spending some time with your customers to be a true partner, I would change that. I can't say their name, but I work with a few insurers today that I feel like are really embracing this mindset. I mean, they are spending the time to learn their customers. Now, don't get me wrong, the side benefit of them partner with their customers is if there's a claim filed that they were a good partner to their customers on, they gave them plenty of proactive notice and they're not able to pay a claim because of that. That's a side benefit, but that's not why this carrier that I'm in particular that I'm referring to. It's not why they're doing it. They're doing it because they want to be a good partner. When their customers sign the renewal order form every year, they want them to think, man, this company is the only carrier that's ever actually cared about me, has ever really done the work with me, has been a good partner to me, has helped me mitigate my risk. Because at the end of the day, I think most consumers of cyber insurance are really just looking for help. Maybe it's to help them win more deals because if they don't have the right insurance coverage, then they can't sell. Maybe it's, hey, I only have a handful of people on my cyber team. If this company can help me mitigate more risk by providing me real-time insights, then it's better. But I would say just my thing that I would change is like this mentality that the carriers are just out for more money, more profits, more margin, and shift that to they're a good partner of mine. But part of being a good partner is penalizing me when I behave badly. And behaving badly sometimes means you've been told a number of times to help mitigate risk and controls and do more patching, yet you've not done it. And so I think if the general philosophy of the industry would shift to partnership versus profit center, I think it would be a huge benefit. The profit center will continue to be good and probably get better, but the loathing that many consumers have for insurance companies would definitely be reduced. And I think it would be sort of a new dawn. And I think at the end of the day, the final comment here would just be we're all in this together. Whether you're providing a policy, whether you're buying a policy so that you can be protected, we're all in the cyber fight together. And if we can shift our mentality to working together to solve these big problems, I think we'll all be in much better shape.
Great answer, and yeah, great note to leave it on. We're all in it together. So yeah, thank you, Jay, so much for joining us. It's been some really kind of useful insights, and yeah, all the best.
Yeah, thanks, Jake. Appreciate it. Thanks for having me on.